Can you hear me, see me? Hey. Okay, so I guess that's sort of yes. Hi, so how are you doing? Good afternoon from Brasilia, my hometown. God, I miss Brasilia. I'm going to Brazil on the 17th of July to see my mom. It's been 6 months since I last saw her. So you do. Thank you, Guilherme. Hello, Elaine. Hello, Noeli. Hello, Thaís from Patos. Vladimir from Jundiaí. Hello, everyone. So I guess you can hear me, see the slides. Everything is working, right? Hi, Paola. Hi, Lavinia. Hi, Lavinia. How are you doing? All right, the audio is great. Good, because I spent a lot of money on this little thing here. So audio is supposed to be good. That's great. So good afternoon, everyone. I think it's time. I'm sorry that you're freezing. I think it's about time we start. I deeply value your time. Teachers don't often get enough free time, right? So whenever I find a group of teachers such as yourselves that taking your free time and using it for the betterment of education in the country, I find it very noble. And I promise I'll be as straight to the point as possible so that we don't use more of your time than we should. So thank you very much for being here in this afternoon on a Wednesday. I'm very honored to be here. So shall we go? Today we're going to talk about lesson planning. I'm here on behalf of Troika, on behalf of BRAZ-TESOL. If you're not a BRAZ-TESOL member yet, you're going to find a very interesting link. I don't know where, but there is like interesting links. Click a key like here or there. I don't know. So do check it out later. Today we're talking about lesson planning. Lesson planning has always been, together with pronunciation, one of the topics that I find the most interesting in reading about and talking about, because I believe that a very well planned lesson and a very well prepared teacher is likely to have a lesson that is at least effective. Let's not say that you may not achieve flow or that experience of mastery in your class, but I find it very hard to go in the classroom without a plan and be successful. So I feel that lesson planning is a paramount skill for teachers. And this is why I like talking about it so much, because I believe it can have a profound impact in your practice and in your students' development, of course, right? So we can talk about lesson planning. I'd like to know a little bit of how you plan your lessons. Of course, I won't be able to address all different styles, but I think this question would be, do you have a system to plan your classes? Or do you always plan your classes from scratch? Is there a process that you often go through to plan your classes, like a framework to organize your class? Or do you always plan your lessons from scratch? Because a while ago, I was planning all of my lessons from scratch, and I used to take the time of the class to prepare the class. For example, if I were to plan a lesson that was 1 hour and 30 minutes long, it would take me 1 hour and 30 minutes to plan the lesson, right? So I got to realize that this was not healthy, right? This was not doable because imagine if I worked 40 hours a week or 44 hours a week, which is which seems to be the status quo now. I would be working 88 hours a week, right? That's not possible, right? That's not doable. So I thought, and then I've been through this course, and then I met a couple mentors that helped me with a system, with a framework for planning lessons much faster and much more effectively. Because now, instead of planning the lesson from scratch, I have, say, boxes of classroom moments, of lesson moments to fill. And then I think about the activities and the dynamics that will fit these boxes. And this is the framework. So the goal for today, for this session, is showing you a framework. So this is why that article is there in the title. How to plan lessons effectively, a framework, meaning that this is not the only way to plan lessons, but it is an effective way to play lessons. So we're going to go through the stages in this framework, looking at why they are there and what kind of activities and techniques and dynamics we can include in this box. And by the end of the session, I'm going to thoroughly criticize this framework. So I'm not saying that the framework doesn't work. It works. It works beautifully. But as nothing in the world is perfect, there are a couple of criticisms and perhaps a couple of reflections and questions that we might want to ask when looking at this framework. But first, before criticizing the thing, I'm going to present you the thing, try to convince you that it is beautiful so that our discussion at the end seems more, heated, perhaps. All right. So this planning framework comes from this idea of backwards planning. So what we're going to do is look at the lesson from end to start. Instead of planning the lesson, it might sound counterintuitive, but it's not. Hear me out. It is easier to think, and I think this is for any kind of planning that you're doing in life. If you're thinking about your goal and then going from where you are to the goal, it might be a bit tricky to plan the steps. However, if you go from the goal backwards till you get to where you are, I believe that the process of thinking about the steps are easier. Is easier to design. So we're talking about backwards planning, which in this framework, looks like this. First things first, you gotta have a name for your lesson, right? So why are you teaching this class? And then, because we don't teach out of faith, we teach with a lot of faith, but so that we don't teach out of faith, we have to create an assessment tool at the end of the lesson so that we know whether or not students have achieved the aim of the lesson, or to what extent have they reached this aim. Right, so we're going to design an assessment task to check if our aim was achieved, because we don't want to get to the end of the lesson, say we're being observed, and then the observer asks, so did students achieve the aim of the lesson? And you go like, I don't know, right? We want to know. We want to know. We want to have at least some data to say, yes, we learned it. They learned it, right? So the assessment tool is for you to check if students learned what you wanted them to learn, and for students to assess their own learning. But before we can throw students in the assessment tool, because we're very nice teachers and we want them to succeed, we're going to give them enough opportunities to practice control over the structures and the skills they need to carry out the assessment task and be successful. So we're going to create moments that students will practice control over the new language. This language has to come from somewhere. So we need to give students input, this input being oral or written, but students have to have input that they understand so that they can work with the language afterwards and be assessed on the aim. But before we can give students input, we got to get them interested in the class with a lead-in. Does it make sense? And then the lesson would work bottom up, right? You start with a lead-in, get students interested in the class, you give them language input, they practice control over the structures, the structure and vocabulary, for example, so that they can put this together in the assessment task, carry out the assessment task, and achieve the aim and show us and themselves whether or not they achieve the aim. Yeah? We're going to go through each of these steps so that it's a bit clearer for you. Okay? Eleni and Rosalia, so we're asking. We're going to see how this works. Okay? So first things first, what's a good aim? Let's look at one. So this is a lesson aim. What do you think of this aim? Okay, it's weak, it's objective. Okay, it is sort of objective. Too focused on grammar. Deductions, okay. Very generic. Yeah. So here we're focusing too much on a grammar aspect, right? So modal verbs in the past. We don't have a context, we don't have a use. This aim is not focusing on students' production, right? So use modal verbs for what, right? It's the same thing as students will learn the present perfect. Students don't want to learn the present perfect. They want to learn how to talk about their life experiences. They want to talk about something that has just happened, right? So we want to use language to do something, right? So let's take a look at, let's tweak this aim a bit. And let's see what it looks like now. Students should be able to speculate about the past. You see, now we're not focusing on a linguistic feature. We're not focusing on a grammar bit, but we're focusing on a function of the language. We're focusing on doing something with the language. Yeah, and it is, I don't know if the word is more objective, but it's, I'd say more specific, perhaps, right? So we're looking at a use of the language. But I think if we tweak it this way, we get the best aim, in my opinion. Students should be better able to speculate about the past in the context of accidents. So here we're looking at a full context where this language happens, because language is context dependent. We're going to look into that further on. We have a very clear context. we have a use for the language, and which is something that is key, and that even though it's just a tiny word in the aim, but I think it can have a profound impact in teachers' philosophy of educating. Students should be better able to speculate about the past. Not able, but better able. Because when you look at it from this standpoint, you're saying that students cannot speculate about the past. And more often than not, if you're teaching, I'd say any student, but especially at intermediate students and advanced students, they will probably have seen that you're teaching somewhere before. They might even be able to use it in certain contexts, but are not 100% fluent with it or proficient with it. And then if you look at it from this perspective that I'm going to make you better at doing something, I can help you be better at doing something from a myriad of perspectives, right? So say I'm looking at my grammar focus is modal verbs in the past, right? Using modal verbs to talk about past events. So imagine you get to class and students can already use modal verbs to speculate about the past. Does this mean that your job is done? If you have an aim such as this, maybe. But if you're saying that students will be better able to do that, there's always room for improvement, right? You can work on their complexity. You can work on their pronunciation. You can work on sub skills of speaking. You can work on connected speech and how naturally things sound when spoken. You can work on the chunking of language and having pauses at the right moments when they're speaking. So you can work on a bunch of areas, because your main focus here is to make students better at doing something than when they arrived, right? So even though it's just a word, but I think it can affect profoundly how we look at students, as in, okay, you might already know this, but I can help push you to the next level, right? So this is our aim. Students should be better able to speculate about the past in the context of accidents, right? If you have such an aim, designing an assessment task for this aim is most of the time rephrasing the aim. So a way to check this aim, to assess this aim, would be in pairs, students role play a conversation between a police officer and a person who has seen a car crash, for example, right? So the person that is reporting the car crash will speculate about the past, saying, "Oh, he might have been drunk. He might have not have seen me." Right? So they use this language to speculate about the past because they don't have the whole picture, right? Let's think of another aim. For example, students should be better able to schedule a night out with their friends, right? So scheduling a night out with their friends. So in groups of 4, students will talk about their routines and find a time to meet and schedule a night out, right? So if you have a very clear aim, it is often easy to think about how you're going to assess this aim. Akayuso, I'm sorry, I'm probably just crushing the pronunciation of your name. Are you sure aim is over the subject? I believe that the aim is the first thing you should think about when when you're designing a class, because the aim is going to answer the question, why are you teaching this class? And the answer can't be, or shouldn't be, in my opinion, very personal opinion, because it's in the syllabus, or because I have to cover page 5 and 6, perhaps, right? So the aim is the first thing, so that you know where you're going, and then knowing where you're going to design the route to get there, right? So let's stick with this aim. Students should be better able to speculate about the past in the context of accidents. And then we're going to assess this aim using a communicative task. And what does it mean to be communicative? What's the difference between a situational grammar activity and a communicative task? The main difference, there are two main differences in my opinion. A situational grammar task is an activity in which you have an agenda, a grammatical agenda. So you want students to use the present simple to talk about their routines. So this is my this is my activity. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. Let me rewind. Communicative task. Ixi, gente, I lost it. É a idade? Okay, so a communicative task is one that has a clear context. It is reciprocal, right? A grammar activity. Voltei. A situational grammar activity is one in which you want to check if students can use the grammar that you taught them. Period. Good. So, for example, if my activity is tell your friend about your routine, is there a purpose in this communication? No. You don't walk up, you don't walk to people in the street and you say, hi, I always wake up at 7:30 in the morning. I sometimes brush my teeth before I have breakfast. I often have breakfast at 8:30. That's weird. People don't do that, right? So this is a grammar, a situational grammar activity. So you're using the grammar to talk about something, but it's mainly focused on using the grammar, right? A communicative task is one that there is a purpose for doing it. There is a goal. Oftentimes in a situational grammar activity, the teacher is the one who knows when the task is over. In a communicative task, there is a clear end for the task when we achieve the aim of the task. For example, let's look at context first. So a communicative task has context. Let's look at what context is. Very briefly, Vinny described it as context as being 3 Ps. Communication happens with a purpose between people in a place. So why is this communication happening? What do I want to achieve with this communication? Who are the people involved in this conversation? And where are we? Because if you change any of these, you change the language you need. And this is why we say that language is context dependent. Let's give it a try. Let's say that our purpose, because we're talking about our aim, right? So students should be better able to speculate about the past in the context of accidents. Yeah. So our purpose will be to report a car crash to a police officer at a police station. I think this is the beauty of a context. You can see this, right? It's very visual. You can see the people. You can think about the language that they're going to use. You can think of the register. You can think of the different the relationship of power that we have in this conversation. You can think of some words that the person is going to use, right? You can think of the words that the police officer is going to use. If we change it a bit, so here we're going to be very descriptive. We're going to be as formal and as polite as possible and trying to stick to the truth as much as possible. If I change the context a bit, language changes. So now I don't have to be as descriptive. And as I'm not describing the accident or reporting the accident to a police officer, I'm reporting it to a friend. I don't have to be as specific. So my purpose in reporting to the police officer was to take a police report so that he could write a police report. But here I'm just telling a friend. If I change the place, this conversation changes dramatically. It's an informal conversation now. Maybe I'm trying to, I'm going to exaggerate. Maybe I'm going to try and be funny. Maybe I'm going to omit the parts in which I was guilty, right, of not paying attention to the road. And if I change the purpose, you change completely. Everything changes. Right. So this context, the language students are going to use here is completely different from the language that someone who's reporting a car crash to a police officer at a police station will use, because the context is completely different. And this is why we say that language is context dependent. So if there is a clear, I think that the purpose is the big word here, because if there is a purpose in the conversation, students know when they are finished, because there is a communicative goal in this conversation. So if I'm talking to my friends to schedule a night out, the moment we manage to find a time that all four of us, very, very hard to do if you're adults, the moment we find a time that we four can meet, we are done. There is task achievement. We achieved the communicative goal of the task. If there isn't one, if the activity is talk about your routine, how do I know when I'm done? And this might just be the reason why when I set these kind of activities to my students, say, tell your friend about your routine, they look a bit awkwardly at each other. They talk for 30 seconds and stop, because there's no point in telling my friend about my routine. And the other big word that comes that Thornbury adds is reciprocal, which means that a task is only communicative when I need you and you need me to complete the task. So if the task is talk about your routine, you don't need your friend. You can talk about your routine alone, looking at the mirror. But if you have to schedule a time to meet, I need you, and I need to actively listen to what you're saying so that I can interject in the right moments and help us achieve the communicative aim of this task. You can achieve communicative tasks very easily by adding artificial goals to simple tasks. So, for example, Talk to your friend about your routine. It's a grammar activity. Talk to your friend about your routine and find 3 things that you do at roughly the same time. That's a bit more communicative because it's reciprocal and there is a purpose. One might argue that this is not a real life-like purpose, but still, it is a purpose, right? And it's better than having no purpose in the communication. Yeah. So this is our assessment task. So this is how you design a communicative assessment task for our aim. But before we can get students to, we're going to talk about scaffolding in a second. If we want our students to be successful at this task, we have to give them opportunities to practice control over the language that they will need to accomplish this task, right? And this is where I think if you've been in any of my talks before, you've heard this metaphor before. This is why practicing control, this scaffolding is roughly, it's the methodological support, the temporary methodological support that we give students with new knowledge so that they grow used to using the new language and having control over their language, or over this new language, up to a point that you can remove this temporary methodological support and use language on their own without this support, right? So it's I like to see it as the plates in a scale. You begin the class with a lot of support and very low challenge because we want our students to succeed from the start. And as the lesson progresses, sometimes as the unit progresses, you're going to decrease this support and increase the challenge. And this is bound to help students become more autonomous with using the language. And the metaphor I like to, it's actually an analogy, I think. It's probably in practicing control and scaffolding is why I think more people can ride bicycles than people can ride skateboards. Because on a bicycle, there is a moment to practice control. So this picture, you see 2 kids riding bikes with training wheels. So these training wheels are the temporary methodological support to learn how to ride a bike. And they're important because the moment you sit on a bike with the training wheels, you experience mastery. Because the bicycle with the training wheels, it's pretty much like a chair. So you could, I don't know, have lunch on a bike, even though you don't know how to ride a bike, but you could sit on the bike with the training wheels and have lunch because you're not going to fall, right? And then as you practice and ride the bike with the training wheels, you get used to balancing, and then you remove one of these temporary supports, and then you sort of ride right to one side till you're able to balance and remove the other support, and then you can ride the bike on your own, right? In the skateboard, there's no practicing control. The moment you step on the skateboard, you're supposed to perform at an expert level that you don't have. And there is no support around. There are no training wheels for skateboards. So you're going to fall. And you're going to fall lots of times before you can actually start riding straight the skateboard. And this is why I think people quit trying to ride skateboards and they don't quit when learning to ride a bicycle, because learning to ride a bicycle, it's a much more uh, comfortable and successful and happy experience, because you experiment success from the moment you sit on the bike, and then you have success after success, and only then, when you remove both wheels, that you're actually going to encounter difficulties, that you're going to fall. But you're only going to fail when practicing on your own, after you've been through the training, the initial training, and succeeded a couple of times, right? So people are much more bound to endure in an activity when they feel successful in this activity time after time. If people feel like a failure time after time, they probably drop it, right? And then you're going to have students, sometimes, more often than not, adult students, saying that, oh, I can't learn English because they failed so many times before that they learn this helplessness. It's what we call learned helplessness, right? So they learned that they cannot learn English because they failed over and over again, right? So this is why I believe that practicing control is so important, and that the idea of scaffolding, of having students being successful from the start, is so important. So for the moments of practicing control over new language, you probably want to have two, or depending on how long your lessons are, and depending on your group, of course, but usually two foci are enough. You're having, say, a grammar focus and a vocabulary focus. So if my main aim is that by the end of this lesson, students should be better able to schedule a night out with their friends, this is my final task, right? In groups, schedule night out with your friends. And then for practicing control, I need to offer my students practice over what they need for this task. So my students are going to need for this task present simple and everyday activities, or present simple and time. So I'm going to give them practice over these. So we're going to have a gap fill, we're going to have an oral drill, a substitution drill, a substitution table, writing a dialogue or editing a dialogue from the book, right? So they're practicing control over these features so that they can put these two together to carry out the assessment task, the communicative task, and assess whether or not they achieve the aim. But this language has to come from somewhere. And this is where input comes in, huh? Right? So input can either be oral or written. So input is always text, be it oral or written. So input can be a written text in the course book. It can be a text from a magazine, from a newspaper, an Instagram post. It can be oral, like a listening, like a video. What else? Teacher talk, student talk, right? Maybe a TikTok, maybe an Instagram Reels, any sort of oral or written input, right? And then you give students this input, this moment to see the language in a context at work. And in my opinion, it is better if this input resembles as close as possible what students will need to do in the assessment task. Because then they are, back to Vygotsky, they're seeing a better abled person doing what they're supposed to do, and they can use that as a model. And then the input is going to be very, very relevant. So, for example, our input here is going to be the teacher talking about their routine and recording it live using WhatsApp so that students have an authentic listening activity. But before we can give students input, we got to get students interested in the class. A lead-in is just it's just like what you see in this picture. It is sparkly, it is quick, and it calls attention, right? So my favorite lead-ins are questions. So asking students a question. I think I believe that language learning happens in communication. So I believe that there's no better way of starting communication than a question, right? So you would ask students a question just to get them talking about the topic, and then they're in the class, right? So let's look back at this framework and check how this lesson would work. Aim first. By the end of the lesson, students should be better able to schedule a night out with their friends, right? That's our aim. I'm going to begin the class by asking students, hey guys, welcome, how are you doing, what's up, how's life? How's your routine? My week is crazy. So this is probably like A2-ish, right? A2 level, A1 plus. So my week is crazy. What do you do? And then students will start talking, right? So, oh, teacher, I do this, I do that. If students are able to produce the target language, in this case, present simple, and vocabulary to talk about everyday activities like take a shower, wake up, have breakfast, etc. Great, write them on the board. And then students talk about it for a while. That's my lead in. Okay, so I'm leading students in the class. And then I'm going to give them input. So I'm going to say, so guys, I'm going to talk about my routine, and I'd like you to listen and check if our routine is very different or if it's similar. Okay, that's input phase. And then I tell my students what I do. I tell them about my week, and I record using a recorder or WhatsApp voice message, right? And this is a technique called live listening. It's a listening activity that happens, well, live. I believe it's a good idea that you plan what you're going to say. So, for example, I'm going to talk about my routine. The target vocabulary is wake up, take a shower, have breakfast, have lunch, go to school. And I'm going to use simple present because I want my students to notice simple present and then try to get it from the text. But not a script, because if it's a script, it's not live anymore, right? It's not conversation, it's not speaking, it's reading. So then I'll tell my students about my routine. So guys, I wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning, and then I do this, and then I do that, and I'm recording. Yep. And then when I finish, I ask, okay, so guys, is our routine very different, similar? We talk about it a while, so we're checking the gist of the audio. And then I'll say, okay, so now we're going to listen again. This is 1 minute long. We're going to listen again, and I'd like you to write down the activities I do every day. Okay? All right, play it again. We're listening for specific information. Students want only those specific words about the activities. And then they listen, 1 minute again, they write it down. Okay, so guys, what should you write down? Oh, teacher, we got this, and that. And then we write on the board. We clarify anything. So, oh, do you understand this? Okay, what is this? What is that? Check pronunciation. Great. Now, we're going to listen for the last time. And I'd like you to get 2 complete sentences using those words. Okay? And then they listen again. They write down 1 or 2 sentences, elicit these sentences, and write them on the board. Because now I have the 2 language bits that I want my students to practice control over. I have complete sentences, that's the grammar, and I have the everyday activities, that's the vocabulary. If I have 2, 3 examples of complete sentences using the grammar I want them to use, I can help my students see the pattern in this structure. This is why we say that grammar is a system, right? Because there are patterns, there are elements that repeat. Of course, there are exceptions, but there are elements that repeat. So then you guide students through this analysis of the patterns and saying, okay, so this is how it works. All right, so how do you think this works? Oh, teacher, I think it's this and that. Okay, so now we're going to practice control over these 2 areas, over this grammar and over this vocabulary. Good. Okay, so we practice this grammar in a gap fill, in a substitution table, drilling with a substitution table. This vocabulary, maybe flashcards to practice the activities. Great. Now we're going to merge these 2 together. And in groups, you're going to describe your routine to find a time to meet. Students put these 2 together, describe their routine, they find a time to meet, teacher, we're done, teacher gives them feedback, and then based on the feedback, I often like to get students to repeat the task. So they do the assessment task once, you take notes, and then you give them feedback. Look, this, and that you said, great, perfect, keep at it. This is brilliant. This, and that, this is not there yet, but how can we fix this? And then you elicit correction. Oh, teacher, we can say this, that. Great. And this is the area that we're focusing on being better able at. Because maybe for this bits that were not perfect, perhaps it's not a mistake, but it's something that the student said that they could have said it better. This is especially useful when teaching intermediate students so that they can break the glass ceiling of the intermediate plateau, or advanced students so that they become more sophisticated users of the language. It's telling students how they can do what they just did better. I like to call this feed forward, right? Feedback is based on what you've done and if that was right or if that was wrong. Feed forward is me, your tutor, your teacher, trying to show you the way forward. So how can you do this better? So we're going to do this, and that. We're going to use this more often because this is correct, and we're going to pay attention to these mistakes. Great. Now, change groups. Let's do it again. But this time, focus on our feedback and on our feed-forward strategies. Students would do it, you give them feedback again, and as a personal opinion, when you get to this final feedback moment, I believe that it should focus on student successes. Like, look, you've done this better. Did you notice that from the first attempt at this task and the second, you did this better? It was easier to do this. You were more fluent. You were better able to do this. And chances are that a student doing the same task for the second time is going to be much more successful than it was in the first time, because the first attempt was like a rehearsal, right? And it is incredibly motivating to see your progress from one moment in one class to another in the same class. Like, imagine seeing this from a student's perspective and thinking, if I can be better inside the time frame of one class, imagine what these classes are going to do to my English in the long run. Say in a semester, in a year, in 2 years, in 3 years of classes. So showing students how much they succeeded is very powerful for student retention. And we all want to retain students, right? If possible, and especially useful with teenagers and adults, get them to record both moments, to record the first attempt. They listen, they write down feedback they would give themselves, they share it with the group, you elicit the feedback they would give themselves, you give your feedback, and then they try again and listen again. And then they listen, they try again, record again, listen to the final version, listen to the first version, and compare them. So that I can say, wow, I can see my development from attempt number 2 and attempt number 1. And this is very, very powerful for students' motivation. Much more powerful than giving them candies and stickers, right? It's language being there. It's not language, but learning and development being its own reward. Seeing your progress, right? Visual learning. All's great. Does it make sense? Yeah? Cool. Sense of achievement is the best motivation. I agree. And for anything in life, I'm a true believer that people cannot motivate other people, right? I think that the only thing that actually motivates us is ourselves, and this is not from a self-help perspective, but it's I think that the only thing that can motivate us to develop is development, is success. So this is why I think that having students succeed from the moment they walk in the class and showing them that they're succeeding is so important, right? Okay. How can we then, as nothing in education is perfect and brilliant and fantastic, there are always points to criticize so that we can be on our toes when looking at something. So how would you, John, this is the idea. This is the main goal of this session, is having this framework in mind so that you can plan lessons faster, right? So I need a lead in, I need a moment of input, I need a moment for students to practice control over a structure, assessing the learning, and achieving the aim, right? So this is why I think this is important, that this is helpful, because you're not going to plan from scratch, you're going to plan from within a frame, right? So how can we maybe not criticize, but what are the reflections that we can take from this framework? For example, we often talk about student centeredness and student protagonism, and how students should be on the leading role of their learning process, right? And I don't have the answer for this question, but how much student-centered and student protagonism is there in a lesson that the teacher chooses the aim, the teacher chooses how to assess, the teacher chooses the areas to practice control over, and how this control is going to be practiced. The teacher chooses the source of input and which input students are supposed to incorporate, and the teacher chooses how the lesson is going to start. How much student agency do we see in a framework like this? I can tell you that this framework works, especially with basic students and some intermediate learners. But how much student agency is there in this scheme of planning? How could you make this this framework, more student centered, more agency, right? Another one, when we get to the practicing control bit, we are practicing control over the structures so that students feel confident with using these structures. And after they've been accurate enough with using these structures, do we allow them to use the language freely in a communicative environment, in a communicative way? Are we being behavioristic by trying to avoid mistakes at the end, at this final moment in the class, by giving students controlled practice so that only after our green light, they're allowed to use language creatively? And also, in this sense, do we really learn languages as Thornbury would call them, as in grammar McNuggets? So today I'm going to present you with this present simple grammar McNugget, and then you chew on it, you swallow it, and then by putting it together with the grammar, with the vocabulary McNugget that was included in the kit, you put it together in the assessment task. Do we learn languages as building blocks? As in, you get the building block of simple present together with the building block of this vocabulary. And is this how we make sense of language and how we develop in language? And well, I guess to finish, my suggestion is, if you've never done anything like this with this planning framework, do give it a try and see how it feels. Ask your students for feedback. Like, what you think of this lesson? Was it clear? Did you realize why we were doing what we were doing? Could you realize the aim of this lesson? And then after giving it a try, think of what would happen if you change the order of steps. There is one that is, or include extra moments. For example, what would happen in a class that you begin with the lead-in and then you follow it with the assessment task? Right? Because if you start the class, say, what's your week like? Is it hectic like mine? We have a little chat, and then I say, okay, so now in groups, I'd like you to schedule a night out with your friends. This is a framework we call test, teach, test. Right? So I'm going to throw you in the deep end communicative activity from the start, and see how you do, how you fare in these uncharted waters. So students will do the task, the teacher will take notes, and after the final, this first task, this first communicative assessment task, I will teach you, students, my students, what you need based on your development, based on your, Jesus, I'm horrible for words today. Based on your, doing of this task. And then based on this, I'm going to give you input. I'm going to give you controlled practice so that you're comfortable with doing this, with using this new bit. And then we're going to repeat the assessment task, because I want to see if you evolved, if you developed from point A to point B. Right? It can also be another idea of working with this. What if your focus in the lesson is not grammar and vocabulary, but you're teaching a writing class, you're teaching a speaking class? Would this framework work? What would you have to change? And if you had to change, would you include something or would you remove something? And do you have any questions? Mm-hmm. Oh, you're welcome. This is not mine, by the way. Okay. um, all right. So let me show you this. Does it work? Does this work well for private classes? Yes, Denise, it does. It does work fine. The only thing about private classes is that you're the interlocutor and the assessor at the same time, right? So I've always found private classes very difficult because you're playing both roles, right? What's the main difference of a warm up and a lead in? Okay, I love this question. A warm up is an activity that you can keep up your sleeve and use it in mostly any class to get students excited and get them engaged in the lesson environment. And it's not connected to the lesson itself. So, for example, a warm-up can be getting students to talk about their favorite movies, or talk about or a Kahoot game about Disney characters, right? It's something to get them moving and excited. A lead-in is, as the word says, you're leading students in the lesson. So if we're talking about, say, second conditional, for example, so that's my grammar focus of the lesson, your lead-in is going to be something that will get students talking about the aim of your lesson. So my aim is, by the end of the lesson, students should be better able to hypothesize about winning the lottery. So I'll get to class and say, hey guys, what's up? How are you doing? What would you buy? Hey guys, you've just won $100,000. What would you buy? And then this is a lead in. Students will be talking about the aim of the lesson, right? Is it clear? And a warm-up is just something fun to get students started. Yeah. I think warm-up and icebreaker. I think the icebreaker is used when you don't know the class that well, right? It's like a get to know each other activity. So you're actually breaking the ice. But it gets to a point that you don't have to break the ice anymore, right? You're just warming up the class and leading them into the lesson. I don't think I'm not a huge fan of warm up, to be honest. I'm a huge fan of lead ups, let's say, like this mix of a warm up and a lead in. A lead in that is so interesting and so engaging that it feels like a warm up, but connects directly to the topic of the lesson. This is not always very easy to do, or sometimes not even possible, but I think this is what we should strive for. A lesson beginning that is very captivating and very interesting and connected to the topic of the lesson. Yeah. So Troika is giving you a 10% discount in any course you find some information about Troika in the interesting link here or there or here. On courses, on our membership for courses like this one, we have like the Netflix of VLT, so do check it out. And if you're not yet a BRAZ-TESOL member or coming to the conference, I have very good news for you. BRAZ-TESOL International Conference 2021 is coming. It's going to be online, of course, from July the 14th to the 17th. And we have this super cool discount for you. So if you follow this QR code, you're going to get the ticket for the conference at a special price and 6 months of BRAZ-TESOL membership. So why not give it a try? And if you're coming to BRAZ-TESOL conference, I'm presenting there. So I have no idea when my talk will be available, but I recorded and sent it today. And thank you very much for being here. It's always a pleasure to be with colleagues. Thank you. Bye. Oh, and you're getting, Disal is raffling a ticket. Raffling a BRAZ-TESOL membership and one ticket for the conference. Todos que estão participando vão concorrer. Entraremos em contato com os ganhadores por e-mail. Olha que coisa mais linda. Isn't that great? Yeah? So do check your emails. All right, goodbye everyone, and see you.